Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, distinguished participants. On behalf of the Climate Change Secretariat Capacity Building Team, I would like to welcome you to this fourth UNFCCC Capacity Building Talk. My name is Alejandro Kilpatrick, and I'm the manager of the Capacity Building Subdivision here at the Climate Change Secretariat in Bonn. Our team basically supports all matters related to capacity building under the UNFCCC process, the Convention, the Paris Agreement, and we also support the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. We really want to thank all the participants for making the time and your interest in attending this event. As a special thanks to those who join at difficult hours or have connectivity challenges. We look forward to what I'm certain will be an interesting and insightful discussion over the next 2 hours. Before starting, just wanted to give you some brief housekeeping rules. To avoid disruption and background noises, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted and that your camera is switched off, unless you are given the floor by a moderator to make an intervention. Please note that by participating in this event, you consent to it being recorded. Today's event is the fourth in the UNFCCC Capacity Building Talk series, which is a series of events which seeks to facilitate discussion and the sharing of knowledge and information among actors and stakeholders involved in supporting or providing capacity building on climate-related issues. This series was launched during the virtual climate dialogues in November 2020, with a very interesting first talk on the topic of capacity building for monitoring and evaluation of climate change efforts. The second talk was held in May 2021 and focused on ownership of capacity building and the importance of addressing developing countries' needs and priorities. The previous talk, the third one, aimed at exploring how the access to capacity building can be expanded or enhanced. And now we're here in our fourth capacity building talk today when we have chosen the topic of strengthening the capacities of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, but also micro-sized enterprises, to engage in climate action and seize new opportunities. The focus of this capacity building talk is to provide an overview of what are the key capacity needs and gaps for small and medium-sized enterprises in different regions around the world to engage more actively in climate action. This is based on an interesting work we have developed together with IDRC. Under the UNFCCC process, the capacity building framework acknowledges and emphasizes the importance of promoting active participation and improved cooperation of a wide range of stakeholders. And this includes, of course, governments, but also private sector and civil society. As we know, SMEs in that sense are a key driver of the private sector as they hold regional and national and global importance when it comes to the economic reset needed for decarbonization and climate resilient development. Therefore, we believe capacity building activities must take SMEs into consideration in order to contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We hope that this webinar will directly contribute to the ongoing work on capacity building in the UNFCCC process and inform those discussions. And we are very fortunate to have a very diverse panel with climate capacity building experts from different institutions and different regions. And we'll be hearing from them shortly. We'll also be providing, I will be providing a short presentation of mapping studies that have been done in different regions on what are precisely those capacity needs and gaps of the SMEs. Our work that I've been doing in close partnership with International Development Research Center of Canada. But before I am very pleased also to moderate this entire event. But before we go into the agenda itself, I would like to begin with a short icebreaker using a tool called Mentimeter. And after that, I will make this presentation and lead the panel discussion. Just to mention that our team strives to design each capacity building talk as an interactive and participatory event. Aside from this Mentimeter exercise, which will open the webinar, you are also invited to ask questions to the panel and also share your own views and perspective on the topic at hand. But please, in order not to overcrowd the chat, we kindly ask you to reserve your questions for the panelists for the dedicated open plenary discussion after the break. Now, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague Pedro, who will start and lead us through our icebreaker. So, Pedro, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alejandro. Hello, everybody. Here on this slide, you can use the QR code or the link with the code to log into the Menti. After that, you can give some answers to our question. I will wait just a few more seconds until you can all access the platform. So you can either use the QR code or the link. Okay, so I will now move on to the results. Let me see here. So we're basically asking you what are the barriers for SMEs in dealing with climate-related risks. So any words or ideas that comes to mind when you think about the challenges, and we can already see some answers here. So, okay, we have capacity building, finance, knowledge, technology, all important topics when you think about how SMEs can deal with climate-related risks. What else? Management is also a good word. Innovation is, I think, a very essential word for today's discussions. What else? Training, also, of course, really important topic. Short-termism, metrics, gender gaps. I think that's also a very good topic that we can address during today's event. Terminology, also a good word. Language, of course, a lot of focus on knowledge and finance, mainly. Regulation, management, too many entry points. It's also a key connection to the topic, I believe. Too many entry points again. Investment, they're risking, of course. Concrete solutions, bureaucracy, big consultants. Yeah, all of them very good words. Let's wait if we can get any other words that you associate with the question. Financing, once again, getting the right clients, using localized processes, access to education, lack of coherent policies. What else? Lack of supportive policy, low capacity. Okay. So I think these are all good words to reflect on the challenges that SMEs face in dealing with climate-related risks, and of course, what today's discussion will focus on. You can continue submitting your answers, and but now we are actually going to continue with our discussions. And so now I'd like to give the floor back to Alejandro. Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and thank you everyone for actively participating in this Mentimeter. I think that what the words in the screen basically confirm a lot of the findings on the studies we undertake, and I'm going to deliver a quick presentation on these experiences in three regions. In Asia, parts of the Asian region, Africa, parts of Africa, and the Middle East and Northern Africa region. Basically, to explore what SMEs lack in knowledge, skills, and capacity to be better prepared for climate change risk and opportunities, we carried out these studies, the Climate Change Secretariat, in collaboration with the International Development Research Centre of Canada, IDRC. With IDRC, we work together in the studies for Asia and Africa, and also very close collaboration with our regional collaboration centers from the UNFCCC, which are based in Kampala, Dubai, and Bangkok. These mapping studies basically were part of a literature review, but also we conducted targeted surveys and interviews with representatives of SMEs, associations, and networks. Maybe just a reminder, if you could please maintain your microphone muted. So an extensive literature review what took place, surveys and interviews with SMEs associations and other networks. The ultimate aim of these studies was to get an overview of what are the key capacity needs and gaps of SMEs in the different regions. And we saw that there are quite some differences, but also a lot of similarities. And the discussion later in the panel would focus on what are those two key topics that came out regularly in the outcomes of the study. So as we all know, private sector actors, including SMEs, will be critical actors addressing climate change because of the reasons you can see in the presentation. Climate change does present risk to business operations, for example, through infrastructure damage from flooding, droughts, and severe weather systems, which in turn introduces new challenges to a fragile and vulnerable enterprise system, particularly for micro and small, medium-sized enterprises. Then it's really important that this is addressed and that SMEs are equipped with the necessary capacities and skills to be able to adapt their business models and operations to a changing climate, but also to be able to seize new opportunities that may arise, particularly when we're talking about the role of SMEs in value chains and how through an increasing awareness of particularly transnational corporations of climate change, how is that demanding changes in the supply chain and what's the challenge and or opportunity for micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. So if we go to the next slide, we all know what's the economic importance of SMEs, and in the different regions, we have here some figures. For example, in the countries where in the Asian region, in Asia, small and medium-sized enterprises represent 97% of all enterprises, 69% of employment, and 41% of GDP. But also they could be very badly affected by climate change, and there's a projection by the Asian Development Bank that this could lead to 11% loss of GDP, and that's related to how SMEs and in general the private sector or economic activities would be impacted. In the MENA region, also you see a high level of involvement of SMEs in all employment being provided. But it's also one of the most water-scarce regions, and the outcomes of the study show that this is an issue that's of high concern for SMEs. In Eastern and Southern Africa, again, they employ up to 80% of the workforce, but climate change also threatens food security, economic stability, and the health standards of the region. So like mentioned in the next slide, some of the key findings of the mapping studies. So it's not an issue necessarily of awareness. The surveys pointed out that there is a good level of awareness and interest in engaging in climate action for small and medium-sized enterprises. But there is still not enough information on understanding of what are, for example, the international, local, and national policies and regulations, and the relevance for SMEs. For example, when it comes to emission reductions, what are the regulations, the norms, and how SMEs need to comply with these regulations is not necessarily fully understood. One of the key findings, and we'll get into more details during our panel discussions, is not enough tools or methodologies or understanding what are the climate risks faced by SMEs and how to assess them and to address them. That's combined with the need for more technical specific capacities to develop concrete actions, mitigation, adaptations from the technical aspects, how to implement technologies that reduce emissions or how to make more resilient a business. One of also the key findings that came out of the studies in all regions is the issue about accessing finance, the need for information, skills, capacities for accessing finance. What are the instruments available to these enterprises, and how to design and draft projects that could be eligible for funding to support adaptation and mitigation aspects. Something that also came out very strongly through the mapping studies is to better understand, and this is linked to climate risk, what are the challenges and barriers more longer term for SMEs due to climate change, and what are the opportunities, again, in terms of SMEs being, in a lot of cases, providers of services and goods for value chains, and this is implications for sustainable value change, and we'll hear our panelists also speak about that. So overall, these are the main findings of the studies and some recommendations. I'm trying here to present some. Each study for each region had their own set of recommendations, but there are recommendations that were in a way common to all the regions. For example, the need for more systematic identification of what are the needs and gaps of SMEs in terms of the context, specific, local, regional context, but also sector specific. The importance of continued development, collaborative capacity building programs. There are a lot of programs already out there, but maybe they're not so well known, and it would be important to build on these programs and make them more known and establish and strengthen coalitions or partnerships of different stakeholders, including the bigger private sector actors, players. Again, there's a lot happening already through the UN Global Compact, the SME Climate Hub, but further work could be done on that. And also something that came out also very clearly from the studies, and it was part of the scope, is what could be the role of academia and research organizations based already in countries to help build the capacities of small and medium-sized enterprises, because they have a better understanding of what is the national context and could ensure longer sustainability of the capacity building efforts. Combined with, for example, South-to-South collaboration opportunities and also donor funding. And like I mentioned before, it was very strong that the special attention should be given to building capacities for accessing finance and developing of financial instruments that could be of use for SMEs in accordance to their specific context and specific sectors, and that will be also a topic we'll be further discussing in the panel. So that's a bit of a snapshot of these three studies. The three studies are being finalized and formatted, and they will be available soon in our UNFCCC web pages. And the intention is that these studies do not remain only as academic exercise, but to foster partnerships and associations to make move forward in the recommendations. Like I said, it's not about reinventing the wheel, but seizing on those opportunities, on those consortiums, those partnerships that already exist to really enhance the capacities of micro and small, medium-sized enterprises to better address their own climate change challenges, but also be able to contribute more effectively to attain the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So now we will be moving to our panel discussion, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our esteemed panel of experts. So please welcome Erin Tansey. She's the Director of the Sustainable Inclusive Economies at the International Development Research Center in Canada. And as I mentioned before, they have been our close partners in developing these mapping studies, and we are very thankful for their support and looking forward to our ongoing collaboration. Erin has more than 20 years of experience in working for and with United Nations agencies, Canadian international NGOs, and donors. So welcome, Erin. We also had Ahmed Elberbali. He's the Managing Director of the Clean Energy Business Council for the Middle East and Northern Africa, and has vast experience managing projects with a solid technical background focusing on clean energy. Thank you, Ahmed. Then we have Marlene de la Chaux. She's the technical expert for SMEs, productivity and working conditions and the International Labour Organization, ILO, and also has vast working and researching experience with private sector and entrepreneur topics. Welcome, Marlene. Also, we have our colleague Eddie Sambataya. He's the Managing Director of Finding XY, an innovation center providing business advisory service, and has over 14 years of professional experience in the field of investments, focusing in his country in Uganda. And last but definitely not least, my colleague Suksuri Shamsuk. She's program officer at UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the regional hub based in Bangkok, and has been working on energy, climate change, and chemical management for sustainable development for over 15 years. So a very warm welcome to all our panelists, and we'll be asking you a couple of questions, 2 rounds of questions for our discussions today. Please kindly remember to keep within the time allocated so that everyone has a chance to speak, and also we have enough time for questions from our audience. So the first round of questions, as you can see from the screen, these questions focuses on the 1 or 2 of the major findings from these studies, which is the capacities, the needs and gaps, capacity needs and gaps of the SMEs to assess climate risk management. And the second one has to do with the topic of accessing finance. So I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists to answer both questions in this round. So at the same time. So I'll start maybe with Erin to please address the questions in the order you want. If you want to address them 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, whatever it's you prefer. So Erin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Alejandro, and thanks for organizing this. I can see from all the people getting into the lobby and joining this conversation that it's something that a lot of people are interested in. So that is fantastic news early on a Monday snowy morning in Ottawa, where I'm speaking to you from. So thanks very much. So as you heard Alejandro say, IDRC has been involved in this mapping study. And so most of what I'm going to talk to you about really comes from there. So I think I'll address question 1 about what the key barriers and challenges are regarding financial resources, accessing financial resources to address climate issues. From our experience and these respective mapping studies that were conducted in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, I did identify some common gaps. So first is the lack of knowledge on the existing climate finance opportunities. So that ranks really highly by the fact that that ranks very highly, followed by the fact that SME entrepreneurs don't see necessarily climate action as a priority. They know it's there, but it's not necessarily top on their list. And that national governments really seem not to be focusing on SMEs as a target audience to involve and to involve them in these financial opportunities. So there's also a lack of financial products that are specifically designed for small and medium-sized enterprises, and a lack of clarity on what the range of financial service providers that SMEs could actually work with. Studies in Southeast Asia show that micro SMEs feel that financial service providers don't have a good understanding about their unique needs and their unique challenges. So more often, the products are designed primarily for large-scale investors. And in Eastern Africa, the majority of SMEs have been unable to withstand climate-related shocks due to a lack of financing, which then bars them from developing adaptation strategies. And in some regions where small-scale driven sectors like agriculture account for 25 to 35% of GDP, only 2 to 5% of the financial lending is advanced to this sector. So there's a real imbalance there. And other challenges faced by SMEs in tackling climate change are highlighted and include inadequate financial autonomy, limited knowledge and limited technical and human resource capacity, hence why we're all here talking about capacity building. And these findings are supported by the survey results in the study. And the results indicate that the priority for climate action support required by SMEs are in the areas of climate awareness raising, technical and financial capacity building, and in provision of finances available for these SMEs to climate-proof their businesses. Other capacity building needs, I think we'll talk about later on. But it was also found that the private sector engagement in climate change governance is minimal. So SMEs are hardly involved in the preparation of national climate change plans and strategies, and it's unclear to what extent SMEs' interests are incorporated into the decision-making process. And that's even more acute when we're talking about women-run and women-owned SMEs. So I think that all of those are really some of the major findings about the barriers and challenges regarding access to financing. Should I go to the next one, Alejandro?
Yes, please, Erin.
Okay,
let's
sure.
group them together.
So just to remind you, this is the question: to what extent do we consider SMEs to be prepared and possess the necessary knowledge to fully integrate these risks into their business models? So, beyond financial knowledge and the financial knowledge gap that the SMEs, that many SMEs have, many of them are not well prepared to cope with future possible climate change risks and the impact these might have on their businesses, as well as understanding or awareness of the existing national climate change plans and policies. So business owners are aware of climate change. Yes, that's a good start, but they're not really necessarily involved, engaged with, or knowledgeable about the policies that are affecting them. And most of the respondents were only moderately aware of the risks and impacts that climate change could have on their businesses, including their understanding of what a business continuity management plan is and why it's important when considering climate change adaptation. So, for example, some SMEs also find it very difficult to engage in climate action when their profit margins are so small. Implementing climate action measures is really far from their day-to-day agenda. And there's also a lack of quantifying data that quantifies losses and risks that arise from climate change impacts in Southeast Asia and Africa in particular. So availing such data to SMEs in ways that they can, use and digest these may serve as an awareness tool on the need for disaster preparedness for these business entities. So they also lack environmental benefits. They don't see the environmental benefits of these related actions and cost-saving opportunities related to engaging in these actions. So in addition, they need new technical skills to address climate change challenges for their businesses. And only a few SMEs have a good understanding of the impacts that climate change might actually have on their business now and in the future. So in summary, SMEs have low awareness on the information about the risk of damage that climate change might have on them, and little knowledge on climate and disaster resilience and the options for adaptation, and also on financial opportunities arising from engaging in climate mitigation opportunities, and overall a lack of knowledge on the existing national climate change policies and adaptation plans. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin, for elaborating a bit more on those challenges and highlighting the importance of data governance I think that's very important. And again, thank you for the collaboration in developing these mapping studies, and we're very happy of working together with the IDRC. Now I'll hand it over to Ahmed. Ahmed, please, you have the floor to address the same questions. So, from your experience working with SMEs, what are the key barriers and challenges regarding accessing financial resources in order to address climate-related issues? And the question on, to what extent do you consider SMEs to be prepared and possess this knowledge and skills to fully integrate climate-related risk into their business models? Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having me and for organizing this. Speaking from sunny Dubai, you can see the sun behind me, so it's always sunny here, so it's no different. So on the first one, just to give some context, I work for the Clean Energy Business Council. We are an NGO based here in the UAE, but we cover Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. So we are actively engaged in different conversations regularly with the governments and the private sector. We consider ourselves the voice of the private sector in trying to advocate on policy and policies across different new energy topics across the region. So I will comment on this, but I'll comment on this from actually the SMEs actually operating in the clean energy, not just SMEs trying to find climate change, but also SMEs that their actually business model is, the whole business model is designed around something related to fighting climate change, which are the companies we interact with on a daily basis. So I think in terms of the challenges, which are not just financial, but I think they are very much connected, and the limited access to finance is just as one of them, as a result of many of them as well. So we see that if I can actually group them to mainly three main challenges. One is the regulatory framework, and that's across the whole Middle East and North Africa region, the MENA region. There's no specific regulatory framework that's actually designed to support SMEs. We recently started to see that even the government entities are being restructured. You have ministers actually focusing on SMEs. That's something new, but we haven't seen that impacting the development and advancement of SMEs yet. I think this soon will happen, and accordingly, you see that there is very limited. The market entry for SMEs to this sector is very hard. Most of the clean energy, the energy, water sectors are heavily monopolized by the governments, and accordingly, there's not much room for SMEs to actually grow and accordingly access finance. Because when you go to a bank and you want to take a loan, you have to present an investable project. And these projects that you can actually get are not accessible for you as an SME most of the time. Yeah. I think there's someone unmuted, so I hear myself twice or three times. Now it's good.
Ahmed, you're muted. I don't know what happened, but you're muted now. Please go ahead.
Whoever was unmuted muted me. So that's the first one, the lack of regulations or the immature regulations that would actually aim to support SMEs. And I think this is a paradigm. It has to be a paradigm shift in the way governments think. Otherwise, you did mention earlier in the slides that it's only 10 to 40% of the GDPs, the average GDP of the countries in the region that are actually fully independent on SMEs. That's not the case in many other countries globally. They could actually have a very big role in actually supporting the economy of the government, creating more job opportunities, etc. So that's one, regulatory. The second one is actually the financial aspect from the lenders or the investors themselves. The risk, people, when they do the risk assessment, there's a much higher risk and when you actually invest in SMEs. And I think part of this is because of it's a perception. A lot of cases, actually, you have a lot of SMEs that have solid business models, solid operations that would actually justify this money. So I think sometimes it could be based on data, but in a lot of times it's just based on natural perceptions that people acquired across the years that SMEs are not in a position to have the best resource allocations of the financials. And the third one, which is also a result, it's not a cause more than it, but it's more of a result, it's the human resources. We have I don't think we have lack of capital, but we have lack of connections between the different what people learn in the academia, what people can actually execute. The research you did mention earlier, that is not a research. This study is not just for academic purposes, but it would actually be translated in actual efforts. I think that's the key. We don't say that in the region yet. I think that's something that has to be reflected in actual initiatives to educate people. Educate the talent that would actually get into the SMEs, etc. So I think this is the key barriers which eventually end up that SMEs don't have access to financial resources from the different possible resources. On the second one, to what extent you consider SMEs to be prepared to process necessary? Again, I'm answering this from the SMEs aspect who are actually already operating in climate change. So they are already doing business in that sector, but we act in different topics. One of them, which is this question is very clear to, is energy efficiency. A lot of the companies operating within this, of course, MENA are actually SMEs, and it's if you look at how companies are actually investing and fighting together, and this is sometimes it's actually funded by individuals who put their funds to for the energy efficiency models. You have what's called shared savings or guaranteed savings. Basically, the company would go to a facility and tell them, we would pay for the whole OPEX, CAPEX, the initial cost of retrofitting your building, and you would have a specific savings on the long term. And what's funny is that people actually think it's too good to be true. So these SMEs cannot actually generate money or secure projects accordingly. And when you go to the banks as well, most of the banks are not aware of the models, so they don't actually find these projects investable, and they end up in a way they are not making money, or they're not securing money, not because it's not investable, but because the model is too ideal. And those SMEs accordingly are not giving up or finding other models that would actually be just very normal model, not related to climate, but they're actually investing, and this is from different cases we have been working with, they're investing from their own individual pockets. So I think it really has to start with a specific regulatory framework, and just a couple of data. I have this here. So we did a study that was published about a month and a half ago, trying to look at the amount of investment that's actually being already in the region. So in the whole MENA region, only 1.5% of the total investment for SMEs is being given or has been given till end of last year to SMEs. 1.5 of the total investments to SMEs, which is very, very small. And that's considering also the amount of capital the region has. If you look as well, we did a survey, which I'll put the link in the chat. There's a lot of data on this as well. If you look at the number of startups or number of SMEs in general and working in climate change in the MENA region versus Europe or the US, I think I have here the percentage in the MENA region. It's like you have 150 companies versus about 500 companies generally. That's climate change SMEs versus other types of SMEs. The percentage in Europe and the US, it's like at least 10-15 times what's the ratio on the Middle East. So that's I'm sure this is not that relevant to the topic of the webinar, but I think this study as well shows it's not just the challenge of SMEs in general, it's even more challenge for SMEs working within clean energy or fighting climate change or actually operating in the business, because these specific sectors are even more regulated as well. So to sum up, there are some barriers from the regulatory framework which has to be sorted. I think this is the most urgent and the most important ones: human resources and capacity building. This is very important, and more collaboration between academic institutions, policymakers, and industry is very key to achieve this as well. And the third one is the understanding from the financial institutions and having more access to finance, which part of it could be facilitated by the governments as well. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, and thank you for bringing that perspective from SMEs already in the sector, the clean energy sector. who are already doing something for climate change and how their barriers and what are the barriers and gaps. Thank you so much. Now we'll kindly ask Marlene to please give us the perspective from the ILO work.
Sure, thank you, Alejandro. Yeah, so I am speaking from Geneva to you today, where it's also sunny and a lovely spring day. And as part of my work in the ILO, which focuses on SMEs, productivity and working conditions, I help coordinate the global SCORE program, the Sustaining Competitive and Responsible Enterprises program, which is a capacity building program for SMEs that we run in 25 plus countries. So I'm really speaking today, drawing on the experiences that we have and in working with SMEs through this training program, which also has a big component on supporting SMEs in developing capacity to adopt resource efficiency and clean production practices. And I want to try and so avoid repeating anything. I want to try and add to the excellent points that Aaron and Ahmed have made before me. And I really want to hone in on one specific aspect that we've really found is quite important. And that is looking at incentives. So really emphasizing and thinking about taking the perspective of an SME and thinking about what is in it for them. So what is the incentive to build capacity on preparedness for climate-related risks? What is in it for an SME to access finance, to adopt greener business practices, and so on. And we found that that's quite a helpful way of thinking about how can we make sure that finance, capacity building measures, and policy measures, how all of that reaches SMEs and really benefits them. And I think when we think about incentives, I mean, there's two ways to think about this. So one aspect is, as Alejandro has mentioned, compliance. So rules and regulations that sort of make SMEs, incentivize SMEs very strongly to comply with specific standards and requirements. But then I think there's also the other side of the coin, and that's encouraging SMEs to adopt more preparedness vis-a-vis climate-related risks, but also green business practices and so on. And that's sort of the route that we try to take in our work very strongly. And I think what we've found is really thinking about how can we link these topics to the core businesses and to the core business proposition of an SME. And I think Aaron has mentioned in the beginning also that, you know, the survey found that many SMEs are interested in climate-related topics, but then there's sort of a question of how does that translate into the day-to-day of an SME manager or worker? And so I think they're really breaking down topics such as climate-related risks, which sounds very complex. I think if I'm thinking about, you know, a simple micro enterprise in Ghana or Indonesia or wherever, and really breaking that down to the reality of an SME or an MSME in their specific context, I think can be quite helpful. And that's also a helpful way to understand better how do the barriers really differ. And that's my second point is when we talk about SMEs, and even more so when we talk about MSMEs, we're talking about a hugely diverse spectrum of enterprises. We're really talking about, an own account worker or a one-person micro business operating in a rural setting, but we are also talking about a medium-sized business with 250 employees that manufactures, I don't know, bottles or what have you, or plastics in an urban center. So we're talking about a huge spectrum, and the needs and the realities differ hugely. And I think with that also, obviously, then what capacity building or risk preparedness or challenges and barriers look like differs. And I think that's, on the one hand, a very basic point, but it's a point we come back to again and again, is really understanding what are the incentives and what are the specificities of the context when we look at SMEs. And then my final point, to not sort of go on for too long, is what we found is incredibly important is that when we talk about barriers, we tend to parse out individual barriers. So we like to talk about capacity building and financial support and policy, and it's sort of all these neat boxes that we have. But what we've seen is that the reality is, or the end goal or the vision that is most effective is thinking about a support system and thinking about how can all of this play together and be integrated, and to kind of really actually move away from the boxes of having these individual barriers and looking in a more integrated manner. How do these barriers play together actually? And then what does that mean and how we overcome them? So often when we talk about, there's challenges in accessing the right finance, a part of that might also be that SMEs are not clear on what documentation and what types of information they need to submit in order to access that finance. So then it becomes a capacity building issue as well, right? And an information issue. And so I think really looking at barriers in an integrated manner, as I think also Alejandro mentioned, kind of, I think the survey is also going in that direction very much. That we found is very helpful in actually finding a sustainable way in creating a support system that could then capacitate and enable SMEs to build their preparedness vis-a-vis climate-related risks, but also improve their capacity to adopt green business practices and so on. So I'll leave it there for these two questions and hope that I've managed to add a little bit to the very comprehensive answers that the previous speakers have already given. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thank you for bringing the issue of incentives, which I fully agree. And I really like the notion of the support system, because I think that's where we're talking about an integrated framing. Now let's move over to Eddie, who will, I'm sure, will speak about very interesting innovations what you've been doing with Finding XY in answering these questions. Thank you. Over to you, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you so much, and for setting me up like that. Yeah, super excited about this. So Finding XY, like it has been mentioned, we create these innovative projects through which we provide access to finance and capacity building for SMEs. So I'll very quickly get into these questions and try not to repeat what has already been highlighted by my colleagues. I think this question is a very popular question, and it's one, I think if you put in a Google search of some of the most popular questions as far as climate change is concerned, this is one of the #1 question that everyone keeps asking. But in this question, it also covers a lot that is not said when it is phrased. For example, when we talk about access to finance, who are we talking about, and what kind of finance, and for whom is this finance for? And I think this has been already highlighted by my colleagues in some of these challenges of who are the whom and the what. And for me, I think the biggest challenge right now we have to accessing finance, and this is a very radical statement, are the intermediaries that are supposed to make these linkages between financiers and the SMEs looking for finance. Because if you look at an investor, you don't get to be an investor unless you have money to invest, right? So unless you're an intermediary and you're saying you're an investor, you don't have money to invest. But if you're an investor, then it means that you have money to invest. Or if you're a donor, it means that you have money that you want to use for greener purposes or social purposes. And if you're an SME, it means that you are running a business and you have an investment need. Now, in between there, we have intermediaries. We have the market-facing intermediaries who are supposed to be working with these SMEs, and then you have the investor-facing intermediaries who are supposed to be working with the investors, to mobilize these funds and create these tools and approaches or strategies of how these investors can get their returns on investment. And this is where the language fails to match, or people fail to hear each other, because investors do have the capital to deploy, and SMEs are definitely present. In Uganda, you have more than 1.1 SMEs in the country, and this is similar for most of the other regions. You have 1 million plus SMEs in these ecosystems. But one thing that you keep hearing is that they lack finance, right? And then from the investors, you keep hearing they can't find a quality pipeline. And this speaks to the intermediaries that are involved in this process to try and match the needs of these two entities in order for this deal flow and these transactions to happen. So some of the points that you have already highlighted, for example, creating coalitions and aggregating support and streamlining the kinds of information that is required from SMEs and investors. These are roles that are supposed to be played by the intermediaries. So when the intermediaries don't do their role well, then we have this particular challenge that we actually speaking about here. And one of the things that is really neglected is the capacity building of these intermediaries themselves. What kind of support are they providing, for example, to investors and to the SMEs? So that there needs to be a focus on how to better build a chain through which financing can flow from the investors through the various intermediaries to the companies, or even just reduce that bureaucracy and even explore more radical ways of how investors can even invest more directly with some of these SMEs. Then to the second question, where on if SMEs have knowledge to fully integrate climate-related risks into their business models. Majority are not, and for reason being that for most SMEs, especially in the sub-Saharan context, their capacity is usually reliant on the background of the founders and the proprietors of these businesses. So, and this is still a very growing space with lots of new knowledge coming up and new kinds of interventions coming up based on the challenges that we face. A lot of these businesses, like it has been mentioned, are not well acquainted with some of this knowledge and how these climate changes are actually impacting their businesses. From my experience working with these SMEs, they can't even define what their indicators are in order for them to provide some quality information, for example, to an investor or to a financier. So there's still a huge gap on educating SMEs on issues to do with climate change, how their business models are actually addressing this, and how they can even measure their own impact, the kinds of impact that they are creating in their own ecosystem. You get surprised that you actually speak to a solar energy company and they won't know what their indicators are, or like what is the kind of impact that you're actually creating, and they don't know it, they can't measure it, right? And it still brings me back to my my first point on the role of intermediaries, because this is something that is supposed to be done by an intermediary to really build the capacity of these SMEs to comprehensively understand how climate change is affecting them, how they can actually measure in their business models the kinds of impacts that they are creating. That's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and thank you for bringing new elements to the discussion, particularly the role of intermediaries and the importance of indicators and how to measure effectively. I'll ask now my colleague Suksiri to provide her views on these two questions.
Right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and very good evening to you all from Bangkok. I will walk you through some of initiatives that UNIDO works on climate action and SMEs to elaborate on our response to this question. Let me also first start by mentioning about capacity building for SMEs on climate action that we have a pleasure to work with UNFCCC colleagues in Bonn and in Bangkok. We listened to Alejandro mention about the mapping study that we did together last year. So UNIDO provided our inputs, in particular on the Southeast Asia aspect of this mapping study. And also last year, I think started mid of last year, we took part with the FCCC colleagues in Bangkok, working on a series of capacity buildings events, one in July, one in October, and the last one, we also took part in the COP site event on this very topic. So we are very honored that we have been working with the FCC colleagues on this series of capacity building last year. And we hope that we could continue collaboration in this important initiative this year onwards as well. Now, moving on to the access to climate finance, and then I hope that UNIDO's intervention in this segment of the discussion would differ from the previous speakers. So I'm building on what previous speakers has already mentioned in terms of the gaps and barriers that SME holds in terms of fighting against climate change. However, though, as one of our speakers also mentioned, we are working with a huge spectrum of SMEs. So each SMEs, not only the barriers that they hold, the needs for climate action that also differs from one subsector to the next. Name it be manufacturing SMEs, startups, or those SME in service sector. Let's say the restaurants, the tour operator, even a small hotel, right? So they are a small business working in a tourism area, perhaps by coastal area. So their climate risk and manufacturing SME located, let's say, in the urban area of Bangkok. So the needs for the climate action of these SME would differ. So with this in mind, we work with SMEs in particular sector and countries. We work with them and helping them to have a better access international climate finance. And based on our experience, we kind of package our technical expertise into themes. So each theme that I'm going to walk you through with a different types of SMEs, and then that hopefully kind of address their climate action needs as well. And we achieve doing so by working with various development partners. In particular, let's say the Global Environment Facility has been one of the largest development partner to UNIDO on climate action. Let me first then start with the first initiative is on industrial energy efficiency. We are working with SMEs in some countries in Asia, for example, Thailand, India, and Vietnam, to reduce their energy consumption by introducing system optimization approach, as well as implementation of ISO 50001 on energy management standards. And again, this is designed for manufacturing SME. Next initiative is on electric vehicles. UNIDO works in several countries to transform a carbon-intensive mode of public local transportation into an electric one. In the Philippines and India, we are working with tricycle operators. And in Thailand, we work with Song Thao. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with the term. It's similar to a tricycle, but it has 4 wheels. So we aiming at transforming them into an electric, low carbon public mode of transport. And needless to say, this project is designed for small public transport operators. And this is, again, another type of SMEs. And next initiative is for startups. UNIDO and DELF work together and under the Global Clean Tech Innovation Program to accelerate clean tech innovation and incubate startups on low carbon technologies around the world. Under this program, we worked in South Africa, Armenia, India, Malaysia, Mongolia, Pakistan, Thailand, and Turkey. This is to name just few countries. I noticed that I have a pleasure of having my colleague from UNIDO headquarters in Vienna, who is the global leader of this particular program. So if we have time, we can invite him to elaborate more further on this. Of course, if we have time, but we should be delighted to do so. And lastly, I'm going to introduce you to our new emerging area of UNIDO's work on climate action, which is building adaptive capacity of local enterprise to overcome climate vulnerability. So we have kind of the first project is a regional project funded by Japan. And we work on this project in Egypt, Kenya, Senegal, and South Africa. So basically, we are kind of combining our strength on agribusiness development and climate action into this approach. So in a nutshell, we apply both greenhouse gas emission reduction, which is climate mitigation, as well as building adaptive capacity measures to SMEs in these countries. As a result, we could reverse biodiversity loss, deforestation, and other type of pollutions as well. So lastly, let me kind of conclude my first part on this access to international finance is that apart from those mitigation forecasts that I mentioned earlier that focus on manufacturing, SMEs or startups or the electric vehicles, we are now also conceptualize and preparing for the new upcoming cycle of the GEF and the adaptation fund, focusing on this new area of works in terms of building adaptive capacity of SMEs in countries as well. So let me leave it at that for this first round, and then I'm happy to answer any question or queries that audience may have on those initiatives that I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you much, Suksuri. Thank you so much. And you mentioned a lot of initiatives, and also our other panelists mentioned some projects, initiatives, studies. So if fine with you, it would be great if you could share any links you have in the chat so that our participants can know more about these initiatives, and we'll be happy also to post them in our capacity building portal for them to be available. So that concludes the first round of our panel. We are a bit over time, but I think we cover a lot of areas that also fit very well into round two, the question for round two. So this is basically what in your view and experiences needs to be done more of, and with whom, to develop and enhance the capacities of SMEs as regards coping with climate change and seizing new business opportunities. I think all of you covered already some of these the aspects in this question. So in the spirit of time and for allowing an exchange with our audience, I will ask you to keep your interventions to, let's say, 2 minutes and very concrete on what would be your top suggestion on what to do more of and with whom to enhance the capacities of SMEs and micro size enterprise too. So I'll start again in the same order. So Erin, over to you.
Thanks very much. And I, for one, have been learning a lot just listening to all my colleagues on the panel. So thanks for that. Okay, so again, back to our mapping study, and this is where this information is really coming from. Given that a vast majority of SMEs have reported not being aware of this, because this is part of the mapping, some of the mapping questions, that many were not aware of existing in-country training programs related to climate change, and the need for government support to transition towards climate-friendly measures or adaptive solutions. It highlighted the need to create the right enabling environment, so the institutional, the legislative, the financial environment. So it's worth distinguishing, I think, between the lack of legal and regulatory frameworks in the countries and the knowledge among the private sector of what kind of laws and regulations and incentives are required. So national and regional governments and SME associations should be involved in these initiatives, training initiatives. So in our view, a particular emphasis should be put on women entrepreneurs and young associations, given the little knowledge on the existing in-country programming or program trainings on, on climate action. So those associations, possibly through the intermediaries that Eddie mentioned, should be given the information about some of these training programs that are going on. So, for instance, in Southeast Asia, we know that existing domestic climate policy and targets that are relevant to micro SMEs and their workings and functions is needed. And so an emphasis should be made on the decarbonization trends and how carbon pricing mechanisms work, etc. But let me just go to some examples. So there's, I guess I would say, examples of some of the trainings that are out there. For instance, with the University of Cape Town, they run the Africa Climate and Development Institute, which is focused on fostering collaborative research and training related to climate change. And the university offers a climate information platform that's valuable, as it offers very detailed information that's available to anyone. And I've got other examples as well. Kenya, in other parts of South Africa, and so on, where there are tailor-made. So, for instance, at Strathmore University in Kenya, they offer a tailor-made technical training on sustainability through their Strathmore Center for Sustainable Leadership. That was launched in 2016. It also hosts the Kenya Climate Innovation Center that provides incubation, business advisory, and financial services to entrepreneurs with innovative solutions to combat climate change, etc. So there are quite a few initiatives that are going on. But just to conclude, I guess, is that there is strategic demand for boosting dialogue between government, entrepreneurs, SMEs, and innovators, so to bridge the gap and bridge the technology gap in climate technology, and a lack of government incentives for private sector to adopt climate technologies with a focus on decarbonization and that whole process. And national financial sectors such as banks, national and provincial banks, should be also involved in building the capacity in their countries. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Erin. Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you. I'll keep it very short. I think just as key bullet points, one is having a clear involvement of the SMEs and the government plans. While you are doing this energy transition, they have to be mentioned, and they have to be very specific strategy how governments will help them to survive in that transition and to adapt with the transition as well, whether it's access to finance, specific incentives, all of the points that have already been mentioned. So I think just at the general view, having them in on the policy framework or the planning level from the very high level as well. That's one. Two, I think specifically in the MENA region, we need to see more collaboration and between academic institutions, governments, and private sector who could perhaps support with funding the big corporations to design a specific tailored training programs, courses, could be for executives and also for young talent and the SMEs, to understand the climate risk and how they can actually adapt and accommodate as well. The third one is really having more access to fund. I think this has to start with the government, especially for SMEs. This could be dedicated funds to help SMEs in the transition to more sustainable and just transition to clean energy. And we have seen a few examples, but perhaps not very active. Dubai has a very active and very good example of Dubai Green Fund, which is part of their mandate is actually to support SMEs as well as big projects. So having dedicated funds that can actually help SMEs to fund or finance their projects and their transition while they are fighting climate change. I think another key point, which could be a little bit more unique to the region, is having access to data. In a lot of cases, they don't have awareness and they can't assess because they don't have what can help them to measure. So having more access to data on what are the consequences of climate change on their business models. And so this is another key point which could start with the government by putting the specific regulations that would actually enable them to have access to data. Regulations, training programs, collaboration between the different stakeholders to enable these training programs, access to funds, and access to data. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ahmed, for all those great points. Marlon, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll also try to keep this brief. I think 3 points from my side. One is really working through local organizations and identifying champions who can really drive capacity building initiatives in a sustainable, accessible, and relevant manner. And I think that often involves building unlikely coalitions and looking beyond sort of the usual suspects and thinking about who could champion the cause. Sometimes it's government agencies, public institutions, entrepreneurship centers, SME agencies, but it could also be networks of freelance consultants, training institutions and businesses, academia, think tanks, and so on, and really thinking about sort of where do the champions sit and how to empower them. I think the second point then is really thinking about, this is a very vast field we're talking about, right? And I think it's sort of come through in the different responses, is that we are talking about SMEs that are innovating around clean energy and where really environmental considerations are part and parcel of the business model and the service and the product they're offering. But then we're maybe also talking about MSMEs that are dipping their toes into thinking about building their capacity on climate change resilience and so on. So it's a vast spectrum. And I think recognizing that also in or mirroring that in the capacity building and the services and support that is being offered, and really seeing that it's unlikely to be one champion or one set of champions, but it's really sort of a vast array of services and support that is required to target these different needs and to sort of also mirror that in the support system that's being created. And then a third point, which is almost, I think, the most important, at least in our work with our SCORE program, is lowering the entry barriers. So especially when we're talking about MSMEs that are interested in looking at environmental sustainability or building climate change resilience and so on, but aren't really sure where to go or how to do this or where to start, is really thinking about what are the low-hanging fruits? How can we get SMEs on this trajectory, and how can we get them to find the entry points? Where are the quick wins that might not require a complete overhaul of their business model or expensive investments in in new technologies, but where are sort of the small steps they can take immediately that could set them on this right path, and then sort of, you know, move it from there, which we found is a really useful way of thinking about how do we get SMEs interested in capacity building measures. Yeah, and I also to say, also to echo sort of the many points that the other panelists have made, but trying not to repeat, so I would leave it at those three.
Thank you so much for those three very good insights and reflections. Champions, it's the involvement of promotion of champions, something that came out very clearly from the mapping studies. So happy to hear you mention it too. Eddie, please.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of points. I'll keep them brief. The first one for me, on who needs to be targeted more. I think we need to see more on gender focused investments. I think this is a group that has been left behind. As Finding XY, we designed a program called the Women in Agriculture Impact Investment Facility, and we would like to scale this out regionally. And the intention there is to really provide blended finance to female-led enterprises. The second thing is the focus more also on domestic companies. I think these also have been left behind. We did some work with UNFCCC. I've just shared the link there, where we published a report that was focused on Uganda and how most of the domestic companies are facing financing barriers. They are unable to raise financing as compared to international companies. So you can find more details of that in that particular report. And then the third one is on taking a regional focus on how interventions are implemented. I was very excited to see in Kenya where they designed an investment function or program that was just focused on Northern Kenya. And I think more of that needs to be done depending on the challenges that are faced in these particular regions, the Turkana region, Southern Sudan region, and all these other Great Lakes regions, and all these other regions where you have particular climate change challenges happening, and specifically designing interventions based on the experiences of those communities. And the last one for me would be to support also the larger corporations, the big organizations, and how they can play a significant role in reducing their contributions to carbon emissions or climate change. I think there is a large focus on SMEs, but more needs to be done on how to work with some of these larger corporations to implement maybe ESG models within their own operations, or looking at financial institutions and how they can do more to design products that measure impact before they provide this kind of financing. We created a platform called the Climate Smart Technologies Impact Investment Facility that is really bridging the gap between renewable energy companies and larger industries and manufacturers, and how investors can come in to incentivize these transactions or catalyze these transactions in order to make them happen. And the essence of all that is really to promote the kind of technologies that are being used in these different sectors. So those are some of the things I can essentially speak for, but important really for us, especially at Finding XY, has been the issue of gender and how to accelerate investments in that space, the issue of promoting these technologies, the climate smart technologies, not leaving the larger corporations behind, and how to integrate them in the same way we are working with these SMEs.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you for sharing those resources in the chat. And I think you realize the importance of an integrated approach. Thank you. And over to you, Suksuri.
Right, thank you. I also would like to be brief by also not repeating what the previous speakers have already mentioned. The first, I'm going to leave with three takeaways. The first one is about this potential capacity building or training. Many of us have already kind of spoke about in terms of the tailored training to specific location of SMEs, as well as, you know, I would even kind of encourage those trainings, those capacity building to be done in local language or even local dialect. And this is where the intermediately association or organization could come in handy, or even the academia, or this champion that we talk about, or the coalition. So they can contextualize each training into that specific areas of that groups of SMEs. So I think this is important, and this is still lacking in many of international projects, perhaps UNIDO included. So that we should do more of. And the next two takeaways, I'm going to kind of shout out perhaps to the SMEs who might have listening or even, you know, check in later on. The first part of this is about the climate risk. We talked earlier, the first session, about how sophisticated and how technical this climate risk assessment is, and how the level of knowledge of SME wouldn't be able to tap those trainings or even capacity building. I would recommend or encourage SMEs to just go and talk to your city hall and ask for their information about these climate-induced disaster that happened over the past 10 years in that particular location. You know, these natural disaster or climate-induced disaster that we talked about is flood, droughts, volcano, earthquake, tsunami, cyclone, or storm, or even if SME located by the coastal areas, in particular those hotels, tour operators, you could check with the city hall or the local administrative office about the sea level rise, the level. And also another kind of important that you might want to check with them is these rising temperatures or the heat waves. And once you have this information, you can also with your team start to assess what might be the impact to your operation from these level of frequencies of natural disaster. So I would encourage SMEs to do that, and then I believe that many city halls would be, you know, kind of welcoming SMEs to go out and check out this information with them. And my last point is about opportunities. Based on my work with SMEs, SMEs are very adaptive, and many SMEs could take this climate action. That this climate action could lead to a new business opportunities. I've been approached by local banks from many countries that they are now becoming more flexible and welcoming to investment in low carbon, solar energy, or even the future food, you know, the plant-based food that everyone is talking about. You can sell these, if you put up investment, you can sell this product in the upper market, and you still can trade carbon credit from this future food or plant-based food. This could be a new business opportunity for SMEs as well, talking about climate action. So let me leave it here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Erin, Ahmed, Marlene, Eddie, and Suksiri for this insightful discussion and for for all your experiences. Again, if you have any case studies or projects you would like to share, please post them in the chat, and then we can also post them in the capacity building portal. And I think I would also encourage our participants to do the same, maybe towards the end of the event, because I already see colleagues from FAO sharing what looks very, the Scala, if I remember correctly, initiative, which looks very interesting. So again, thank you very much. I'm sure we're all now very curious to hear from our audience their questions to you, as well as their additional views and perspectives of the discussions. In the agenda, we had foreseen a 5-minute break, but maybe if maybe we can go ahead, continue to allow enough time for questions and answers. So I will now start this open plenary session, and we will start with questions and remarks addressed to our panelists and moderators. Please indicate in the chat that you would like to make an intervention from the floor, or simply pose your question in the chat, or if you wish, you can also raise your hand, but sometimes it can be a bit complicated. So please remember to keep your interventions concise so that everybody with questions can have a chance to speak. I already see some questions in the chat. So Kathy Lee, I see you. Maybe you want to take the floor.
Many thanks, Alejandro. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm here in a pure personal capacity, and also many thanks to all the panelists, especially Eddie, for highlighting the importance of gender in capacity building. And as some colleagues might remember, that the WGC, the Women and Gender Constituency, offered our support in PCCB 5, and would be more than happy to support any work of the PCCB on gender going forward as well. And also very happy to hear colleagues mentioning many topics like finance, technology, and definitely looking forward to further linkages between the PCCB and other constituted bodies on these topics as well. And I guess my question would be to Alejandro and Eddie, but also happy to hear if any other panelists also want to jump in. I guess the question is mainly what type of support you think would be most helpful in terms of from large financial institutions and also major, for example, professional services or consulting firms. For example, would it be pro bono services in terms of helping SMEs to design their ESG agenda, or help with their net zero reporting, or would it be help them to build connections, or any kind of other support that you have in mind? So I guess Alejandro would be really curious in hearing from you in terms of whether the Secretariat needs any support from the private sector in that way. And from Eddie, I guess would be also very helpful to hear from you in terms of SME perspective. Many thanks.
Thank you, Kathy Lee. Let me just pick up a couple of questions. I see several hands raised, but I noticed that Rodrigo from GIZ, if I'm correct, in the chat said he wanted to ask a question. So I'll continue with Rodrigo, and then I'll take the raised hands. Rodrigo?
Yes, thank you very much, Alejandro. Yeah, basically my question had to do with how your initiatives are dealing with the issue of strengthening capacities of private sector actors, and at the same time perhaps affecting the market and its competition. So basically to know how are you dealing with this issue?
Thank you, Rodrigo. Let me continue a bit. Then I have, sorry if I mispronounce, Babakar Sar. Let's raise his hand.
Thank you. May I intervene, or you would like
please
to
go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, regarding the SMEs, I think that one item that may be really necessary at this point is awareness. I think that we need to reach out as many SMEs as possible, and that will be probably the first item. In the finance component, access risk fund will be also something that will probably help to deploy or to put industries or into operation. The third item, I think, that will be in the term of capacity building, how to support, respond to several proposals. I just wanted to name either NAMAD or World Bank plans and things like that. So, and I really appreciate hearing about the champions, hearing about the support from education institutions. Those are things that we will need also to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Babakar. I'll take one more question and then hand it over to our panelists. I think Najat Sahouk, if I understand, from UCLG. Najat?
Thank you very much. I'm really very delighted and honored to join this timely event because it's linked to the implementation of the SDG 8, how to create decent works, including through SMEs. I'm Najat Zarouk from UCLG Africa, the regional section of UCLG, and I learned a lot from you. So I have just a few comments quickly. First of all, I think we need to know what is the place of the SMEs in the national policies and strategies, and how these national policies and strategies are localized or arrived to the local and regional levels, because this is where the SMEs are created, animated, and can live and can fulfill their dreams. Do we have an enabler environment for these SMEs in terms of, and it was done, it was said during the panel, in terms of access to information, first, all the opportunities offered, whether by the government or the other stakeholders, the access to infrastructures in terms of equipment, services, and infrastructure, access to funding, and it's a very, very crucial problem and issue for the SMEs, and finally, the human capitals and skills. Do we have a mapping on the SMEs engaged in a climate change deal? And if yes, if we can have a copy, it will be fine if we can share it with our members who are covering a network of 54 national and regional associations, and it can help them to support this kind of companies. And who is supporting them? So we need to have an idea who is supporting the SMEs and who and how we are doing it. It is how to create their company, how to set up their projects, and finally, did this SMEs works hand in hand with local and regional government, because it is in the territories where the SMEs can have this appropriate environment to create their project and to have all the opportunities to, because the other problem, sometimes we create the SMEs, but because of the lack of this enabler environment, they finish immediately their work. So this is some question from our perspective. And finally, an announcement during our flagship events, which will be held in Kisumu in Kenya from 17 to 21 May, it's next month. We will have a forum of these African companies, big companies, medium or SMEs. It will be fine if you have any study you have organized that we can share during this event. And thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Najat. And thank you. It's great to hear from UCLG, which has always been very active. Let me just then now move to our panelists. And since we have already still 3 questions, at least in my screen, let's have some short reactions to these previous questions. I know, Katili, you also asked me to react. Allow me to go first, and then maybe we'll ask Eddie, because that was a direct question, and then I'll ask other panelists if they're willing, if they're interested in addressing those comments and questions. So I think what is needed, Katili, is of course, pro bono consultants and this type of resources are always useful, but I think also you mentioned connections. I think connections is also very important, because we've been hearing in the context of capacity building about the importance of retaining capacities and also ensuring country/local ownership. So that's where connections come in, and our panelists mentioned academia, research organizations that are based in the countries. How can you help them build their own capacities to be able to provide capacity? So I think it's about those connections and how to also capitalize what's already been there, use better use of the platform, make the information known to SMEs, but also with a special focus on micro. So that would be my take on it. But maybe Eddie, if you want to address some of these and other questions, if you wish.
Yeah, I'll directly respond to the question from Kathy, and then I'll let my colleagues respond to the rest. So for financial institutions, what can be done? Maybe let me start with what we are doing currently. We have a program called the Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator, funded by the European Union. And in this program, we designed what we call the Uganda Green Finance Academy, where we are supporting commercial banks on how they can develop products that are going to provide green.
Eddie, sorry, we lost you for a second. Oh, I think Eddie froze. Eddie, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're back. Yes.
So sorry about that. I was just saying that we have a program called the Uganda Green Enterprise Finance Accelerator, where we are building the capacity of commercial banks. And what this through this program, we designed what we call the Green Finance Academy. And this Green Finance Academy is working directly with the banks to design these green financing products. And I can say for certain, for example, the Equity Bank, one of our partners, has designed a green finance product with lower interest rates that is targeting green SMEs for us, which is a very big thing in our sector. The other thing that can be done really is on how to support financial institutions to also tap into climate finance or green finance. I think this has to be intentional on how more institutional investors or development agencies can directly work with some of these financial institutions, because most of the SMEs, especially the climate smart SMEs, are going to turn to them for financing. So how to directly support them get the necessary financing that they can use with lower expected returns to finance some of these enterprises. The other last one that I think should be focused on is the issue of catalytic financing. So, and this builds onto my last point. I think this is something that has been widely done by the Swedish embassy, especially in and around East Africa. How to design catalytic forms of financing that can not only incentivize but also de-risk the investors that are working with some of these financial institutions. And by financial institutions, these are broad. I mean, in speaking with the local context, you have different tiers of financial institutions, and the focus shouldn't just be on commercial banks, but also the likes of microfinance institutions, where most of these SMEs have to go for financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. And any reaction from our other panelists to other comments, questions? Siri?
Sure. Hi. I just would like to jump in just to supplement your response and Eddie's response. I guess the question is also about how her organization could work with SMEs. I would also recommend you add on climate risks. When you are talking with SMEs, it's not just about helping them reporting their carbon emissions or their carbon footprint, because based on my experience, if we use the carbon footprint or energy consumption as an entry point, SMEs may not be that of interest, also because they might not use that much of the electricity or energy to begin with. However, the locations where they operate will have an impact to some extent for this climate induced disaster. And this is where I think the study also mentioned the knowledge and the capacity is still lacking in terms of the impact from these climate-induced disaster to the SME operations in the local areas. And this is where I think if you can also kind of be their technical advisor, probably gathering those those information on climate-induced disasters that happening in that area, and perhaps share your information to those SMEs. I think that should be kind of a good first step and a stepping stone to get those SME talking about and taking action on climate action. Thanks.
Thanks, Suksiri. Ahmed, Marlon, I think Aaron, you already provided some information in the chat. If not, let's move to the next round of questions. So I have Tatenda Mutasa. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, facilitator. Thank you very much, panelists, for the brilliant presentations. Basically, I'm just realizing that the SMEs is a very, very important constituency when it comes to this climate change agenda. So maybe I want to understand from the panelists themselves in terms of the recommendations, how best can we bring them on board in our work, in our agendas, in our climate change agenda at country level, even at international level. Maybe we talk of PCCB, we also talk of an action for climate empowerment. Understand that we have the Glasgow work program on action for climate empowerment. How best can we bring them on board? And even on finance, how best can we assist them in mobilizing financial resources for their programs related to climate change? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatenda. Maybe Erin or Marlene or Ahmed, if you want to respond to that. Or maybe give it a thought and let's go for the next question and then we address them together. So I have Precious Mudondo. Precious, the floor is yours. Okay. Probably there's some issues. I think there was another. Okay, so let's go back to.
Alejandro, you're on mute.
Sorry. I didn't see Precious being able to open her mic. So, but if any of our panelists wants to address the previous questions, please go ahead. Maybe Marlene, please.
Yeah, happy to take a first stab. Well, first of all, thank you for these really interesting questions. I think there are a couple questions that really pinpointed some of the key challenges or some of the key dynamics that we're also seeing. And I think the question about how do you bring SMEs on board for the climate for an environmental agenda links to an extent together with the earlier question on market distortion and how to support SMEs without undermining sort of the market that might exist. And I think it's sort of a combination of...
Good afternoon, everyone.
It's Precious.
Hi. Oh, yes. Hello. Okay. Hi, Precious.
Yes, can you hear me?
Good afternoon,
everyone.
Do you want to quickly ask your question? I think we were trying to reach you.
Oh.
Please, Precious, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, you have the floor. Please, Precious, can you hear us? I think you're muted again, Precious. Now we hear you. Go ahead.
Well, can you hear?
Yes, we can. Now you're muted again. Okay, let's give her a minute and then Marlene, please continue.
Yeah, so I think the thing to realize is that SMEs form, so most companies in any economy are SMEs, and SMEs are the key employment providers. So our research has shown that.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear? Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Can you hear me?
Precious,
Okay.
honestly, we hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Yes. Enterprise. We.
Precious, sorry, we cannot hear you. It's breaking up a lot. No, sorry, we cannot hear you. Maybe can you, if you have a question, could you please maybe write it in the chat, and then we can address it. So again, back to you, Marlene.
Sure, yeah. So there were two questions. One question was on how do we bring SMEs on board for climate change resilience efforts and environmental sustainability agendas. And then also another question earlier in the first round of questions that was asking around market distortion. So if we start supporting SMEs now, doesn't that distort the market? And I think those are two questions that really pinpoint. So the key dynamics that we also try to work around and that we encounter again and again and think about sort of how to address. And I think the one element of this is SMEs are crucial for this agenda. SMEs provide the bulk of employment worldwide. Most companies are SMEs in all economies of the world, so SMEs are key players. But as a result of that, it's also what we also have is that a support environment usually will already exist to some extent in most contexts. So there are SME agencies, business development service providers, financial service providers to an extent, innovation centers that specifically target SMEs. And so I think an important element of the work is mainstreaming environmental topics, climate change resilience, and these topics into those organizations and sort of helping equip and build the capacity of those intermediary organizations to then work with SMEs so that work around capacity building on climate change doesn't become a separate segregated topic, but is embedded into sort of other concerns and other needs that SMEs have. So for example, linking together, what we do a lot in our work is linking together questions around workplace cooperation and working conditions in SMEs with also environmental considerations and resource efficiency and clean production. And then linking that with productivity concerns. And so sort of thinking about how does climate change and climate change resilience and these topics, how does it link into the enabling environment that SMEs are already surrounded with? And that would then also not, rather than distort the market, sort of strengthen the market around service provision. So that was just sort of the comment I wanted to make on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. From our other panelists, any reaction? Suksiri?
Sure. I'm also would like to have a second kind of a effort building on what Maureen just mentioned. Our experience also inform us that apart from pinpointing and highlighting the benefits of working towards environmentally sound production or operation, I mean, name it be that they can reduce their energy consumption kind of expense, or they can reduce their expense on waste management. Another kind of angle that we manage to work with SMEs is from consumers kind of a behavior change. And this is so effective when you are working with both production, manufacturing SMEs, where the buyer kind of force them to not using toxic chemicals, to reducing waste and reducing even raw material. This work well with these manufacturing SME as well as SME in service sector. Taking this example of this food packaging. Before COVID started, I mean, 2 years ago, we are living now in the COVID kind of a pandemic kind of a era. And 2 years ago, majority of these food delivery packages is from plastic packaging. But now, at least 80% of the food packages nowadays from this food delivery is bio-based or, you know, bio-based kind of packaging. So this is an effective way of raising awareness from consumer side, and the consumer themselves would force trickle down the value chain, and this also could cause a positive impact on the SME who are the producer or even the restaurant to stop not using plastic packaging, or even, you know, the straws or the plastic tablewares. So that's another kind of technique or kind of approach that we kind of working with, is by the consumer and through the value chain to get these environment and climate action agenda going with SMEs. Thanks.
Thank you, Suksiri. I think we're reaching the end of the event, but I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to hear from Ahmed and Erin any either reflections on this question or maybe some final reflections, and then back to the rest of the panel.
Thanks. I'll just jump in. I mean, I think one of the things that we can all do as this nice big community joining this session today is to try to really push the capacity building agenda to the top of the agenda, let's say for COP27. It's so complex but important and essential that small and medium-sized enterprises get build their capacities, and, you know, and intermediaries included in that, right? So the more that we can build awareness for this need, I think the better it is. It needs to be on at the top of the agenda. You know, whether it's helping SMEs to do the most basics of things, which is even just having an indicator or a set of indicators that could show some of their impact. I think that would really help over the long term to continue. You know, moving and transitioning to low carbon economies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Yeah, I think that's important to raise the profile of the importance of capacity building. And Ahmed, over to you.
Yeah, I don't have any further comments. I think the key takeaway, it would have been interesting to know how many actually SMEs are on the call. So I don't know if there are actually SMEs here, but I think this kind of discussions is a sign that we are actually doing capacity building as we discuss these topics. But I hope we get them on the table to be educated as well and have more access to this kind of discussions. But I think we covered. I hope this is recorded. I think we'll make sure to show it with a lot of the audience. So thank you so much for organizing and for having me.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yes, it's been recorded and it will be available publicly. Maybe again back to for last reflections, Eddie.
Sure. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. So I'll very quickly respond to the question of market distortion. Financing SMEs doesn't necessarily distort markets, depending on how you're doing it. It rather inspires economic development. And if you look at most of the SMEs that we are looking at, those that are social or green in nature, these are SMEs that are doing local production. And they're coming up with all these innovative products, whether it's in energy or transportation or biomass to energy or green sanitary products, whatever they are creating is number one, local, which creates jobs, and number two, it's clean, which helps sustainability. So supporting these SMEs doesn't necessarily mean that we are distorting the market. It's rather bringing more economic development and sustainable economic developments for that. Yeah, final remarks for me would be, I think this has been a very interesting exchange. So many lessons learned here from my colleagues and from some of the questions that have been shared. And the main takeaway for me has been really on how we can work together better and how we can build better coalitions, aggregate the kind of support that is being provided, so that, because that typically would improve the kind of impact that we need to create and meeting some of these SDGs. So thank you so much for having me, and yeah, back to you, Alejandro.
Oh, thank you, Eddie. It's been a pleasure. Suksuri, one key last takeaway.
Well, last word is just to thank you and your team, Alejandro, and we happy to be partnering with you in this event again, and hopefully we continue to partnering and working with you on this very important and exciting kind of initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Suksuri. Marilyn, please.
No, also just a huge thank you, Alejandro, to you and your team for organizing this, but also to the 80+ listeners that had joined into this at some stage, and for the many questions. It's great to see so much interest and engagement. And for me also, this is a great learning experience, also just to see the breadth of elements and factors and dynamics and questions that we are all uncovering in our work, and thinking about what that then means as we go forward. So thank you so much.
No, a big thanks to all our panelists. I would give you a virtual clap, and I'll ask colleagues to do the same. Thank you very much. So we hope the discussion today provided useful impulses to the process, and I think Erin mentioned to make a stronger case about the importance of capacity building and addressing all these needs and gaps from the different local and sector contexts of SMEs. A summary report of today's event will be shared with all participants as soon as possible. We also post the link to the recording of the event on our capacity building talks website very soon. And we also hope to see you at the next talk, which will be held during the second half of 2022. Before we close, I would also like to call your attention, and this is a promotion to the PCCB network. The PCCB network is a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building to provide a space for sharing information, good practices of the work, contribute to the work of PCCB in fulfilling its mandates, and seek to connect with their peers across sectors and regions. I'm very proud to say that the network has now almost 300 members, and that out of the interaction between network members, concrete projects have emerged, and IDRC is one of those examples because of the network connections. A very interesting project has been developed. You can find more information about the network by scanning the QR code that is there in the slide. And if you want to join, you're more than welcome to join this network. With this, the only thing left for me is to again thank you very much, our panelists, and also our audience, a very active audience. I think this is the best attended capacity building talk in terms of numbers. So thank you so much. We also have a survey, and you can see the QR codes there in the slides. We will really appreciate if you take a couple of minutes to fill out the survey, which helps us improve future capacity building talks. Again, thank you. Hope to see you, many of you, at our next talk, and maybe in other venues or sessions, and have more in-depth discussions. And again, if you have any materials that you want to share in the chat, please do it now, and we can also post them. Thank you very much, and wish you a very nice day, evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.